and Sir Brandon Cook as President of West Australian Indonesian Language Teachers Association, and Miss May Turnip as Indonesian teacher of Trinity Christian School in ACT, and also all of our esteemed participants. Good morning, respected teachers, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second seminar series of Language and Culture, Best Practices in Teaching Indonesian Language in Australia.
And culture.
This seminar, held by Attaché of Education and Culture, the Embassy of Republic Indonesia in Canberra. I am Lydia, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Thank you for joining us. And before we begin, here's a few of housekeeping notes. Please make sure you are in quiet environment, have a stable internet connection, and today's session will be recorded as documentation purposes. And there will be question and answer session by the end of presentation. And also, please complete the attendance list that already shared in the chat box. Next, before we begin, let's take a group photo to commemorate this seminar. Therefore, I would like to invite Mr. Angga.
Thank you, Mrs. Lydia. Ladies and gentlemen, please turn on your camera. I will take the photo from the first slide. Okay, I will wait until everybody ready. Ladies and gentlemen, please open your camera if that possible. I will take the photo from the first slide in 1, 2, 3. Again, I will take a photo from the first slide in 1, 2, 3. Okay, for the next slide, for the second slide, I will take the photo in 1, 2, 3. Again, 1, 2, 3. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is for the photo session. I'll give the screen back to Mrs. Lydia.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Angga, for helping. And let's move to our next agenda. We are pleased to welcome Professor Yuli Rahmawati, MSc PhD, as Attaché of Education and Culture in Indonesian Embassy in Canberra to give an opening speech of this seminar. To Prof. Yuli, time is yours.
Ya, terima kasih Lydia. Saya akan menyampaikan sambutan dalam bahasa Indonesia. Selamat pagi di Jakarta dan selamat siang di Australia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Yang saya hormati para akademisi, para guru, para praktisi pengajaran bahasa Indonesia di Indonesia dan di Australia, khususnya Pak Brandon dan juga Ibu May selaku narasumber kita pada hari ini, dan juga para hadirin sekalian yang saya banggakan. Pertama-tama marilah kita panjatkan puji syukur atas kehadirat Tuhan Yang Maha Esa, atas rahmatnya, dan kita bisa berkumpul secara online, secara daring pada acara Best Practices Teaching Indonesian Language in Australia. Para rekan-rekan sekalian, sebagai atase pendidikan dan kebudayaan di Kedutaan Besar Republik Indonesia di Canberra, saya bertugas untuk mendukung kebijakan pemerintah dalam internasionalisasi bahasa Indonesia. Dan selama di Australia, saya senang karena bahasa Indonesia telah menjadi salah satu pilihan bahasa Asia yang dipelajari di beberapa sekolah dan universitas di Australia. Namun pada saat bersamaan juga prihatin karena data menunjukkan dalam 1 dekade terakhir terjadi penurunan jumlah siswa dalam memilih bahasa Indonesia sebagai bahasa pilihan di sekolah. Sehingga fenomena itu menjadi tantangan besar untuk kita semua karena bahasa Indonesia bukan sekedar mata pelajaran, tapi juga sebagai jembatan persahabatan, diplomasi budaya, dan investasi masa depan bagi hubungan Indonesia dan Australia. Sehingga ketika terjadi penurunan, kita juga menghadapi resiko salah satu modal sosial terpenting dalam mempererat kerjasama kedua negara. Namun saya percaya tantangan selalu membuka peluang, sehingga mudah-mudahan kegiatan hari ini menjadi sebuah bukti bahwa kita semua memiliki inisiasi, inovasi, dan komitmen terhadap pembelajaran bahasa Indonesia agar tetap hidup, relevan, dan diminati di Australia. para guru ini telah mengembangkan berbagai inovasi dalam pembelajaran bahasa Indonesia, termasuk mengkaitkan bahasa Indonesia dengan budaya. Dan seminar ini kita fasilitasi dengan menghadirkan 2 narasumber yang luar biasa, Bapak Brandon Cook sebagai guru bahasa Indonesia di John Stamos Road Anglican Community Schools dan sebagai juga Head of Language Department, and also at the same time juga sebagai Presiden Western Australian Indonesian Language Teacher Association WILTA. Dan Bu Mei juga sebagai guru bahasa Indonesia di Trinity Christian Schools, pada saat bersamaan juga merupakan Indonesian Language Coordinator, juga sebagai Modern Language Teachers Association di Canberra, serta menjadi Community Language School Association di Asian. Dan setiap bertemu mereka berdua, saya selalu bersemangat gitu ya, menumbuhkan semangat saya untuk terus berjuang untuk bahasa Indonesia di Australia, sehingga saya ingin semangat-semangat itu juga disebarkan kepada kita semua. Nah, melalui Kedutaan Besar Republik Indonesia, melalui fungsi saya sebagai Atase Pendidikan dan Kebudayaan, berkomitmen untuk terus berupaya merevitalisasi pembelajaran bahasa Indonesia ya, baik melalui kegiatan Indonesia Goes to School, Indonesian Language Teaching Assistant atau guru bantu, Bridge program, atau melalui sister schools, maupun melalui kegiatan kebudayaan yang memperkaya pengalaman belajar siswa di kelas bahasa Indonesia. Jadi saya berharap mudah-mudahan forum ini menjadi ruang berbagai aspirasi untuk terus membangun jaringan lebih kuat, dan mudah-mudahan pembelajaran bahasa Indonesia ini menjadi komitmen kita bersama sebagai sebuah bangsa, sehingga mudah-mudahan tidak hanya terbatas pada peranan guru di sekolah. Akhir kata saya mengucapkan terima kasih Bapak Ibu semua, dan mudah-mudahan acara ini memberikan manfaat keberlangsungan bahasa Indonesia dan juga persahabatan Indonesia dan Australia. Selamat pagi, selamat siang. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Professor Yuli, for
Lydia, suaranya di-mute.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Yuli, for delivering a warm and enlightened speech. Next, we are going to the main session of this best practice seminar delivered by Mr. Brandon Cook. Allow me to read the CV of Mr. Cook. He has strong passion for teaching Indonesian. It was proved by his degree. He has completed Bachelor of Arts Indonesian, also dedicated as Indonesian language teacher in John Septimus Rowe Anglican Community School for 10 years, holding responsibilities to teach Indonesian language to student year 5 to 12, and received the Excellence in Indonesian Language Teaching Award from Australia Indonesia Institute and Department and Foreign Affairs on Trade. So without further ado, let us invite our first speaker, Mr. Brandon Cook. So Mr. Cook, please welcome.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I know we're all in different places at the moment with different times, so it's good to see everyone here today. I'm going to just share my slides, so just bear with me a moment. Okay. Ibu Yuli, can we see these slides okay?
Yes, it's good.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. So let me just adjust this slightly. Okay. So I'll start off by saying I'm very honoured today to be able to present this to you all, and thank you again, Professor Ibu Yulit, for inviting me to speak to you all about the best practices in teaching Bahasa Indonesia in Australian schools. I know there's a few different professions listening in today, so we've got obviously some teachers from high schools and primary schools, I'm assuming, and also some university students and lecturers. So we've got a wide variety of people listening in about these practices. So hopefully there is some relevance for everybody here today. So just a little bit about myself. So yeah, I am a secondary teacher for Bahasa Indonesia, and I also do teach science now and then as well. I've had 10 years of experience teaching Bahasa from year 5 to year 12, but I mainly do focus on secondary school, mainly teaching year 8 to year 12, because I find that those are the years where we really have to focus our knowledge and promotion skills to help the students want to continue their Bahasa all the way up to those later years. I am the head of department for languages at John Search Masro in Western Australia. And I very much love my position because I oversee, this growth in languages at our school, but also as the president of the West Australian Indonesian Language Teachers Association. I also have a part to play in providing professional development and also providing opportunities to Indonesian teachers in Western Australia to help our programs grow. I do coordinate about 4 Indonesian exchange programs at our schools, so I'm very busy keeping the programs alive. And we do have quite a strong program at our school for Bahasa. So we have a lot of students interested in our programs. One of those programs is where I take my students over to Indonesia for 2 weeks, and that's every year in April. And the other 3 programs are Indonesian institutions, 2 schools and 1 orphanage that actually come over to our school to interact with our students. As said previously, my bachelor is in Asian Studies, my major in Indonesian. And I do have a postgraduate diploma of secondary education with a major in Indonesian and minor in science. So the main topics that I'll be looking at are teaching Bahasa Indonesia and just an overall view of that. Something called the zone of proximal development, which I've found very important in my teaching over the past 10 years, and something that I learned at university. And I know that not everything we always learn at university is always applied in our classroom, but this was something that really stood out for me, and I wanted to share that with you. Assessment, formative and summative tasks, the importance of connection with our students, and also the importance of exchange programs in learning Bahasa. So teaching Bahasa Indonesia, there are so many opinions and methodologies and pedagogies that we learn about language acquisition. And I really feel that it's important to share that there's no one way to do it. I really believe that everyone has their own strengths in teaching, and we have to apply those strengths as best as possible when we're teaching our students. So there is no right or wrong way. I think we all do our best to promote Bahasa, and as long as you're passionate about what you do and you share that passion with your students, I think that's the most important thing. Learning Bahasa Indonesia can be a slow process and requires patience. And it's often important that we remind our students of that. We can't sugarcoat it. We have to remind them that it's not done overnight. We can't just learn a fact and then just regurgitate that in the next class that they have. It's really a slow process, and fluency does take time, which can frustrate some students. I know it did frustrate me when I was learning it in school, because I was a bit of a perfectionist. So it's important to know that it does take time, but we will get there with our students. Vocabulary is definitely the key to unlocking the language and confident students. I really find that students are trying to find easy ways these days to become more fluent. But because of that slow process, if the more vocabulary they know, it really is the key to being able to increase that fluency much quicker. Teaching requires positive relationships. If they like you, they will learn from you. That's probably one of the best quotes that I've ever heard in my career of teaching, and that was by Maggie Dent, who often provides professional development on teaching teens. And yeah, I think especially in those younger years, for those of you who teach Indonesian in primary or that lower secondary school, if they like you, that they will continue learning Bahasa, whether or not it's their favorite subject. They will continue learning with you. And when they get a bit older, especially into upper school, when they become a bit more mature, they start to appreciate the language and culture because they are a bit more mature. But in those younger years, they definitely, if you have that positive relationship, they will look at continuing. Ensure you know your students and what they need. we really must be in tune with our students and know what it is that they need in terms of their knowledge gaps, where they're at in terms of learning, how they're feeling on a day-to-day basis. And if we know how our students learn and what they need, then it's much easier to be able to cater for them and keep them motivated and interested in learning. And that comes back to the zone of proximal development, which we'll look at a little bit later. Teaching Bahasa requires a balance of fun and hard work, technology and pen and paper. I really do think that some people are told, as some teachers are told, that they need to make every class engaging. They need to have every game that play with their students, and I really do believe that it's a balance. I think we need to, play those games with our students and have a little bit of fun, but also sometimes it's just a little bit of hard work. The kids just need to actually do that reading practice, do a little bit of writing practice. And same with technology and pen and paper. A few years ago in education, everyone was saying that there's to be more technology in classrooms and screens. And I was a little bit reluctant at the time because I had just started teaching, but I did feel in my heart that, you can't just, get rid of pen and paper. And sometimes, having all this technology, it could have a negative impact. And now we're seeing that in new research that's coming out that, kids are spending too much time on screens and what have you, and the students' literacy is declining. So I believe that there should be a balance with that as well. And always use learning intentions and success criteria to start your lesson. I think it's really important that our students know where they're headed every lesson. And sometimes I think when we think of other subjects, science and maths, kids don't know what they don't know. They don't really know the level of science and maths that they don't know. So for them, it doesn't seem like an onerous task every lesson, but kids know that they aren't fluent in a language. They know how far they've got to go. And sometimes that can be a demotivator. So if we give them success criteria in small doses and say, to be successful this lesson, you need to just do these things, it gives them a sense of achievement, and they feel like they've actually achieved something, and they're making steps towards fluency. So creating interest in students, rather. So there are various ways that we can keep our students interested. And some of those things include using authentic materials, Indonesian songs and music videos, news articles and social media, traditional stories and legends, and contemporary Indonesian films. So we can use all those things in our class to help engage our students. But not only that, I really do believe in trying to gamify learning when it's possible and when you have the time. So you've got Indonesian vocabulary competitions. I know at my school we use a application called Education Perfect a lot. We also use Blooket a lot. I don't know if you've heard of Blooket. It's a really fun game for kids and really good to reinforce that vocabulary. Cultural knowledge quizzes, role-playing scenarios, digital learning platforms, all of those things. But also trying to connect it to the real world. Any virtual tours of Indonesian cities, strides are being made at the moment with virtual reality and things like that. So if we can get our kids to do any virtual tours of Indonesia, especially if there's no exchange, it's a fantastic thing. Cooking Indonesian recipes, all kids love cooking. They love that. Pen pal exchanges with Indonesian students and partner schools, and using current events for discussions. Promoting collaboration is also important, I find. Any group projects are really great on any of the Indonesian topics. Some peer teaching opportunities sometimes, some group cultural presentations, or even language exchange activities with an exchange student. If you're blessed to have Indonesian students coming to the school or vice versa, that exchange is really, really important. One hot topic that I find comes up a lot is teaching Indonesian grammar, or just teaching grammar in general for foreign languages. Some people say that you shouldn't be teaching grammar, that it's kind of just learned through activities. But I really do believe that you need to teach some level of grammar explicitly, and it really does help with when students are actually trying to read and listen and write and speak. because they can use it to their advantage. And it also has other strengths as well when referring to English. So things like word order. I know in my class from year 7 or year 8, I normally say to my students, we say green car, they say, and then the students all respond with car green, because it just gets them to start to think about noun phrases and that reverse word order. And they really start to pick that up. Functions of affixations. It's an opportunity to refer to English syntax and word order and strengthen understanding of how languages work in general. I do really find that actually teaching the functions of affixations in Bahasa, it really helps the students to start to predict the meanings of certain words. So for example, if they learn the word membeli, but they come across the word pembeli in a reading text, and they know that the function of the per prefix is the person doing the action, they'll be able to predict the meaning of that word without actually having to learn explicitly the word pembeli. So I find that knowledge really does help them in the long run. And I do find as well that a lot of students these days struggle with English as well. And it's a great way to kind of advocate for to students and to parents and even to other staff that learning a second language actually helps them to refer to the English syntax and strengthens their knowledge of English as well. Using student-friendly language to help them remember the functions is really important. Make grammar fun. It doesn't need to be boring. I'm a bit of a grammar nerd, and my students know that I do love teaching them grammar, but we have activities to help them to learn those functions. And they do feel quite confident after we master those functions. So things like the per prefix, we'll call it the doer of the action. D verbs, I find, are probably one of the most problematic in Indonesian. Not because it's hard to learn, but because coming from a language like English, where there are so many tenses and there are so many exceptions to rules, Indonesian is such a structured language. And students that naturally speak English do find it hard to connect some of those concepts. So one of the ways that I help my students to learn the D verbs is that I say to them, if they translate a D verb as is, are, or was, followed by the word and then by, they generally translate it more correctly in English than they would if without that. So for example, words like do, did, done, if they were to translate dilakukan, for example, and they're going to say is or are, they're going to say is done rather than is did, then they're not going to translate it incorrectly, because they know naturally from speaking English fluently what the correct translation is. So that really does help them, I find. Per-an words, obviously coming from verbs, and per-an words coming from ber words, and ke-an, labeling those as abstract nouns and concepts. And it actually helps the students to understand the function of the suffix shin in English as one of an example. I know we have quite a few in English, but that's one of the ones that you can compare it to, and the kids can kind of start to connect that idea of abstract nouns, because even students in upper school, year 11, year 12, I find that they still struggle sometimes with the concepts of nouns, adjectives, verbs, and constantly referring back to English as a comparison really does help them to understand that meta language. Object focus and subject focus is another thing that I find that students struggle with, but that's something that really needs to be explicitly taught. And I find that when you do that and you master that, the students become quite confident. And it's also important to know that students can predict the meaning as well, like I said before, and require less dictionary time, because when they're doing tasks, reading or writing or whatever, we don't want them sitting there with a dictionary for 15, 20 minutes trying to find out all the words. So if they can predict some of the meanings of the words based upon the functions of grammar they learn, it really does assist them. So reading and listening are classed as input skills because we get this information input into our brains, and that's why we class them together. I know reading and writing often get said together, but reading and listening really should be put together because they are the input skills. So reading requires strategies, and we have to explicitly teach those strategies to our students. So asking students to read aloud, to work through tough pronunciation is really important. I still do that in year 11 and 12. I get them to read aloud in our class, but I don't always correct them on every bit of pronunciation. It depends on the reason why you want them to read. If it is based on pronunciation, then we can work on the pronunciation, we can correct them, but we also don't want them to be demotivated as well if we're constantly correcting them. So yeah, we use that in moderation a little bit, but it's also good for students to hear you read as well, because they will be able to listen to your intonation and your pitch, and it's hard to teach those things explicitly. So them just listening to you talk with a different intonation in Indonesian will actually help them to become more fluent as well and sound more authentic. Translation strategies, prediction of meaning based upon affixation functions. That's what we talked about before. So that's really important as well to teach them when they're reading. Locating capital letters. I still find that students, even though they're taught this in English, and I'm quite sure they're taught that around the world, that a capital letter means that it's a name of a place or someone's name, but actually when they're reading Bahasa and they come up against a word that has a capital letter, sometimes they forget this, and you have to kind of remind them because they're thinking, oh, I don't know the meaning of that word, and it's someone's name, in fact. So it's important to remind them of those strategies. When we look at listening, though, I generally tell my students that it requires two main steps, like a sorting and a translation when the information comes into their brains. So students must first sort the words out in their brains and create some meaning. And this is a bit of a slow process because when we listen to our first language, or however many languages that we speak fluently, this happens in microseconds. This happens so quickly that we don't even feel it. But when students are learning a new language, these two processes take some time. If they just hear a bunch of Indonesian words, their brain has to sort them out first and know what exactly are words and break it all down and then create meaning from it. So sometimes providing students with a transcript to read as they listen beforehand can help them skip that first sorting process and help them to become a bit more confident in that translation. Because once their translation skills become a bit faster and they know that vocabulary well, we can then keep giving them, we don't have to give them transcripts anymore. And I don't always give them transcripts, but I do like to show them the difference. And the students always say to me, when I give them a transcript, it's easier to understand and follow, follow the speed of the audio track much easier, because they're not having to sort out what's a word and get all confused. So obviously, if those are input skills, your writing and speaking are output skills. Writing takes a lot of preparation and a lot of feedback as well. And compared to the input skills, which are, if you're providing feedback to students based upon those, it really does come down to a lot of vocabulary knowledge. But writing and speaking has a little bit more involved. So providing students an opportunity to write and ask for feedback is vital. When they're learning how to write, they need that feedback. We can't just ask them to do an assessment and hand it in. So a lot of scaffolding, a lot of feedback, so that way we can get them feeling confident before their assessment tasks. Encouraging mistakes is really important. AI and Google Translate are very tempting for students, especially school students, and I suppose now tempting for university students as well. A lot of students are just scared to make mistakes, and I have a lot of students come to me sometimes with their writing practice that they've tried to practice writing, and I can tell that it's Googled, and they wonder why I can tell, and they're using things like aku and using high complex grammar structures that I haven't even taught them, and they're using that because they're afraid of failure, or they're trying to really overcomplicate the process. So it's really important that we encourage mistakes in our students, and also not only just because it just creates perseverance, but also because they need to go through that process. Failure is the best teacher. If they're not making those mistakes, and then we're giving that feedback, they're not learning. So it's really important that you encourage mistakes and make them feel comfortable with making mistakes. Like I said before, provide scaffolding or even an exemplar. I know even in year 12 for my students, I provide examples of what I want to see. Obviously, we explain that they can't copy those examples. They can use them as a guide, but they really need to see what is it that you want them to achieve? What is it that you want them to write? If they don't have that, it's not clear. Sometimes they're not really sure where they're going. For middle school students, we should be focusing more on a range of vocabulary rather than just accuracy and structure. And marking keys should actually reflect this. Because at that level, they're still really struggling in terms of accuracy. They're not quite at that level yet, and we don't want to discourage them. So encouraging that range of vocabulary is really important, and we shouldn't be marking them too harshly on accuracy. So really encouraging that use of a range of vocab is important for middle schoolers. Make the writing purposeful and not just for the sake of a task. If you can get them to write a letter or something like that to an exchange student or give them some kind of relevant context to what they're learning, it's really important that it's purposeful for them, because then they're more motivated to actually write what you're asking them to write. Speaking can be daunting for Australian students. I find when I go to Indonesia, Indonesian students are generally nervous to use English, but they will still stand up in front of a classroom and do a partner role play in English. And, they'll all have a bit of a giggle, but they'll still do it. Asking Australian students to get up and speak Indonesian in front of their peers is so daunting for them. They just don't want to do it because they're afraid of failure, and they're afraid of what their peers think of them. But if we can get them to do this in some level and get used to speaking Bahasa in a classroom, it encourages vulnerability and persistence in our kids. And Australian kids really need that. They need to learn vulnerability and learn to persevere. Providing regular opportunities for exchanges, a regular routine in class, speaking exchanges. So a regular routine in class, like a Monday morning language bubble. I know I do that with my 11s and 12s. Every Monday morning, I ask them how their weekend is, and we have about 10 minutes of just speaking Bahasa. I know when I first start this out, they're always a bit scared to do it, jump in the deep end, but once it becomes natural, they're not so scared to do it anymore. And they realize that they're still talking about their weekend. Having it in another language doesn't really matter. The more you use the target language, the more natural it will feel, and then they will just start to use it more and more. Students will mimic you. So it's important that we ensure we're using the language you want them to learn. And by that, I mean, be careful of using slang and everyday language. For example, if we want them to use saya, we've got to be careful not to use too much aku all the time when we're speaking, because if we start using aku, they're going to start using aku, and they're going to use aku in their writing and what have you. So we have to kind of make sure that the language that we're producing in front of them is the language that we want them to learn and want them to use. They will mimic what you've said, but not only that, they'll mimic the intonation and the pronunciation as well. So we need to make sure that all of those things are correct. The zone of proximal development is something really important to me, because I find that some language teachers always struggle a little bit in terms of how difficult to make their assessments. And when I first started teaching, and I took over from a previous teacher of mine, there was this fear that the assessments, if they were challenging to students, the students wouldn't, if they failed, they would lose all motivation, they wouldn't continue. And so the assessments were a little bit too easy, and just about every student was passing. But then for me, that had another negative effect. It made the students think that they didn't need to actually try hard, and it wasn't worth achieving. And I changed that at our school, because I'm a strong believer that if they've had to work hard to achieve something, they're going to value it much more. That's not to say we want to make the assessments too hard. It needs to be within their zone of proximal development. So what that is basically in a sweet spot, making sure that the assessment tasks are not too easy, that they're able to produce them on their own, or too difficult, that they become too complex and the kids just give up. So this can obviously have a negative impact on their building resilience and persistence and what have you. But having it just right is able to, the students will be able to complete the task with teacher support and scaffolding. And it requires the kids to have that persistence and perseverance. Of course, there'll be kids that will say, you know, oh, this is so hard, and oh, I can't do this. That students will naturally say that anyway. But I find that the only way to know if the assessment task you've given the students is within that sweet spot, is in their zone of proximal development, is if you have a nice kind of curve of students. So you've got a few students with an A, a few students with a B. There are a lot of students surrounding that C grade. And then obviously you will have a couple of students sometimes that fall below that passing grade. But an average of about 60 to 65% is generally classed as a good assessment. I think there are pros and cons to using that method, but I think it's important to know that if you've got students all getting 90% or all 80%, the assessment that you've given them or the task you've given them may have been a bit too easy. If they're all not passing, maybe the assessment was a little bit outside their range of development. So it's important that we think, keep it challenging, but also not too easy, not too hard. So just right. So first step, obviously, is determining what students can do independently through diagnostic assessments like formative assessments. Then identifying the next steps. What activities can you do to kind of give them that guided support? And then obviously after that, step 3, provide strategic support, offering targeted assistance through modeling, prompting, and collaborative learning opportunities. But you must provide them with strategies, reading, writing, listening, speaking, like we spoke before, and then gradually release that responsibility. So reduce that support as students gain that confidence and start to get them to do it on their own. And if they're able to do it on their own, it means that it was a good task and you've given them enough scaffolding. So this brings me to the power of formative assessment. Formative assessment has been around for a while, and there's a lot of research that says that formative assessment is very beneficial to students. But I don't know if a lot of people are actually using formative assessment. And if you don't know what formative assessment is basically a diagnostic tool to find out what your students already know. And that way you can kind of build on from there. It doesn't necessarily need to have a mark or a grade attached to it. And this kind of makes students feel a little bit safer when sitting that assessment, because they don't feel like they're going to be judged on what mark or grade they get. And it should be short, and it should test student knowledge about parts of a topic, not an entire topic. It's important that we provide feedback to the students as well, teachers and parents, about the students' current progress, and this will allow us to do that. It should generally not give a score or grade, and I put in brackets there except for vocabulary, because obviously vocabulary tasks, and I am a big fan of vocabulary tests, I must say, because like I said before, vocabulary is the key for them to being able to produce much more language, and obviously that would require a score. So whether it be out of 20 out of 25, that in itself will give the student their feedback about what vocabulary they still need to practice and what ones they've already mastered. And it's better suited to active learning skills when providing a range of feedback, so speaking and writing, giving formative assessment for reading and listening. Giving feedback for those reading and listening tasks. Is generally surrounding vocabulary, their ability to recall vocabulary, but you can provide a lot more feedback to speaking and writing formative tasks to help the students to improve. So there is a bit of research that shows in classrooms with regular formative assessment, there is a 40% greater learning that goes on than traditional assessment approaches. So some practical formative strategies. You can use exit tickets in Indonesian, vocabulary checks. One of my absolute favorite things to do is just that critical thinking questioning in the classroom, but a no hands up rule and asking all students, because you will always have students that are just very confident, you know, the smart kids that will sit at the front and they all put their hands up all the time. And you'll get the kids that sit at the back that really don't want to answer. They're afraid of failure. And it's hard to know if they've actually achieved. And it needs to become a rule amongst all your students that there's no hands up. You will just choose at random the students that you want to ask. And it's important to know, I mean, as teachers, we know what students' levels are. We know that maybe the student at the back can only produce a small amount of the language, may need a slightly easier question, but giving them the opportunity to answer those questions and then giving them that positive feedback when they've got it right, and even helping them through that process of you know, that first initial time you ask them, they'll probably say, oh, I don't know the answer, and allowing them time to kind of process that and say, no, it's okay, we can work through this together, and you help them through that. And when they get it right, give them that positive feedback, and they love that, and then that builds resilience for them. So next time when you ask them a question, they're less likely to give up straight away. So that one's a really important one. Any digital polling tools you can use in the class is great. And also learning journals for reflection, obviously in the target language, are also really handy. So summative assessment tasks, and these should be the ones right at the very end. After you've done formative assessment, helped kids to improve, given them scaffolding, this is the end of the unit. They need to be designed within the zone of proximal development. They need to be just right. So not too easy, not too hard. They need to align with the learning objectives and ensuring assessments match what students have been taught and practiced in the target language. Obviously with questioning that ranges from easy to more analytical. So you need a range of questions to separate those students from an A, a B, a C, or those who do not actually pass. So yeah, you need a range of questioning, but it must be within the topic that they've learned. Nothing too far outside of what they've learned. Providing scaffolding options, including word banks, sentence starters, or visual prompts to support student success, obviously depending on age group. For my upper school students, I don't provide a lot of those things because they are year 11 and 12. They're preparing for their final examinations. But I know for example, my year 8 class that I teach, when we do a speaking assessment, I give them actually the questions well and truly prior to their assessment task. They create their own answers for those questions. They practice with a friend. They come and ask me for feedback on their answers. And once they've done all that, they can bring those questions in with them to the task. I encourage them not to use them, because if they have to look at their answers, then it's technically reading rather than speaking, but they have it there as a guide if they need it. But I also teach them the repair strategies, things like apa artinya and tolong diulangi, and all of those things that can help them to feel confident in keeping that conversation going. So it's important to provide those options. Number 3, offer multiple formats, combine speaking, listening, reading, and writing tasks to assess holistic language ability if possible. If time allows, combining these skills makes it more meaningful and does collect a bit more evidence about where the student's at, rather than having individual, but that really does depend on time and availability of the students. And include cultural components, obviously. Incorporate Indonesian cultural knowledge alongside the language skills, because obviously those two definitely go together. So when we're talking about feedback and giving that effective feedback to students from formative assessments, using specific and actionable feedback is really, really important. We should focus on particular language elements, not too many things, about 2 or 3 main points that they need to improve at a time. There's no point giving them 5 to 10 points of things they need to improve, because most students will look at that and go, that's too much, I can't achieve that. So keeping it realistic, giving them just about 2 or 3 things they need to improve. And those language elements might be use more deverbs. It might be careful of your spelling. It may be careful of your word order. Make sure you're checking your word order or reread what you've written. Providing clear next steps to improve. The feedback you should be giving them should provide what they need to do next to improve those things that they got incorrect, and using Indonesian examples when possible, addressing both accuracy and fluency. Timely delivery, immediate oral feedback during activities, making sure that, you know, we're giving that constant feedback during class all the time. Obviously, some students are okay with receiving oral feedback during activities within the class, and some students aren't. So the students that aren't, obviously, we know our students quite well. We would give them feedback in a different format, so that way they feel comfortable. And written feedback within 48 hours, because most students will forget what they've done after a day, let alone 2 days. So the best way to give feedback is within that 48-hour period, so that they can remember what they've actually done prior to getting that feedback. And obviously we want them to grow. So celebrating progress and effort is really important. However, we don't want to be putting this in our feedback. Good feedback given to students isn't, well done, you did a great job. That's not feedback. That's praise for what they've done. We can give that to them when we see them, and it's probably better that we give it to them when they see them rather than written down. But effective, formative feedback does not require emotion. It does not have, well done, you did a great job. So just remember that. Connecting it to learning goals, obviously. And encourage risk-taking in the language, in language use as well. So especially those students who are high flyers, the really, really strong students, encourage them to take more risks as well. Because what I do find is we always do focus on the students who really struggle, but we do have, and we're always promoting that risk-taking to those students. But I find that the students who are always very strong, as soon as things become difficult for them, or they find something challenging, they find it really hard too to persist and to persevere. So it's important that we extend those students as well, and encourage them to take risks, because they also need to learn how to persevere. Okay. So the last little bit here, building positive relationships and the key to connection. One of the main things I said before was making sure we have those positive relationships with our students, because the students will obviously want to learn if they are, if they want to learn from you if they like you. So making sure we have genuine interest in what they're learning and them as a student. Learning students' names in Indonesian is great. Connecting lessons to their interests. Sharing your passion for Indonesian culture is really important. They need to see that you're passionate about what you're learning. Otherwise, they're not going to be passionate. And obviously celebrating individual achievements. Creating cultural bridges. Comparing Australian and Indonesian customs is really important to continue doing. Every lesson, try and link what they know to something that's different in Indonesia or the same in Indonesia. Inviting Indonesian community speakers is really great as well. Organizing cultural exchange activities, and even using authentic Indonesian materials. I know one of the activities I used to use in my Year 7 class was a pasar. We called it a pasar kelas, and the students would learn how to bargain, obviously, in a traditional market, but all of the things that they would bargain for were actually from Indonesia. So I would go to Lotte Mart in Indonesia. I'd buy a bunch of things, bring them back to my classroom, set up the market. And when the students are bargaining for it, they're bargaining for real Indonesian items. So things like bang bangs and pop ice and all of those things. So once they actually receive those items, they're looking at them and there's, you know, Indonesian written all over them, and they're saying, oh, what's this? Oh, I recognize that word. That word says chocolate, and all of these things. So yeah, the learning keeps going with authentic materials. Fostering a safe learning environment, encouraging mistakes, as we said before, as learning opportunities, using positive reinforcement strategies, creating inclusive classroom culture, and addressing cultural sensitivity issues if and when they arise. And lastly, the importance of exchange programs. Not every school and institution has the opportunity for these programs, but I encourage you, if you don't have an exchange program, that you try your best to create that exchange, because I do find that students need to see how far they've come. They really need to see their level of Bahasa has increased. And without that connection, without them going to the country or at least connecting with exchange students, they feel like they haven't learned anything, which is ridiculous, because they have. They've come a long way, but they can't see that until they actually put it into practice. I do say to students sometimes, when they go to a cooking class and they learn how to bake a cake, or they learn how to make something, and then they put those skills into practice, they can actually see that what they have learnt is valid, and they can actually see the fruits of their labor or their hard work. With learning a language, they can't see that straight away. And some students are impatient. Most students are impatient these days. They want to see what they've learnt is valid, and all the hard work they've put in, they want to see that they've achieved. So by taking them on exchange or having them interact with exchange students is so important. It builds international connection. I mean, that's obvious, and obviously builds resilience when speaking, because speaking, like we said before, can be quite daunting. So when we have exchange students come, and letting them sit together and make those mistakes, it's important to keep them at the same age and ability. But I find that when you stick an Australian student and an Indonesian student together, the Indonesian student's English is not perfect, the Australian student's Indonesian is not perfect, and they can both see that, learning a language is the same everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are, and it's okay to make mistakes. So it's great for them to see that. And obviously students visiting the country, it can be an eye-opening experience for them, and often be the key to students finding that intrinsic motivation to continue. I know that I've got students who weren't too keen on continuing Bahasa in their upper school years, but when they went on the exchange tour, they came back different people. And all of a sudden they said, Pak Brendan, I really want to continue my Indonesian language study now. I know why you love it so much. And that's just heartwarming to hear. So yeah, that's all the information I have for you guys. So terima kasih banyak, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Cook, for those valuable presentation about a comprehensive guide for Indonesian language educators. But I think the question and answer session will be at the end of the session after the presentation of Miss May Turnip. Is it okay?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
All right. So next agenda, let's us invite our second speaker, Miss May Turnip. But before, allow me to read the CV of Miss May Turnip. She is an Indonesian language educator with over a decade of experience, known for using comprehensible input strategies and supporting student success in national competitions. She has presented at conferences, chaired at 2018 South Australian Indofest, and received awards including the Australia-Indonesia Institute Language Teaching Award in 2022. With academic backgrounds from Gajah Mada University, Prastia Mulia, and Charles Darwin University, she now serves as language coordinator and Indonesian teacher at Trinity Christian School, Canberra, leading K-12 programs and fostering Australia-Indonesia partnership. To Ms. Turnip, please welcome.
Thank you. Terima kasih, and I will share my slide first. Okay, let's see. I think I need to. All right. Kelihatan ya? Okay. So, okay, baiknya bahasa Inggris atau bahasa Indonesia?
Up to you, terserah Bumi.
Up to me. Okay. So yeah, I'll just share it in English. So my best practice is mostly I gather from my own reflections and what works and what doesn't work throughout my teaching journey. So first, for me as a teacher, it's my passion and my vision. It's very important. Research has shown that teacher enthusiasm is one of the strongest predictors of student motivation. So I know when I teach sometimes, like, how do I motivate my students? Like, how can I make them enthusiastic about learning Indonesian and want to continue learning Indonesian? Until I realized most of my students who came to me and stayed learning Indonesian, actually their first testimonial to me is like, your passion catches, like, you know, I do Indonesian because I see how you're passionate about Indonesia and about the language. And also, like, not only in my teaching Indonesian, but in any subject that I taught, I tried to be passionate about it or enthusiastic about it. For example, last year I taught business studies, and it has been more than 10 years actually since I studied business. So I had to do every weekend, I had to read what I was supposed to teach the next week. But what I did was, like, I tried to be passionate about it. I found in that content what I'm excited about. And then when I taught it in an enthusiastic manners. And out of 5 my business, year 11 business students, plus year 12, but 5 of my 11 business students, they continued studying business, and 4 of them actually decided to do business in their university. And one of them actually came recently saying to me, like, Miss, I just got accepted at ANU and it's business. And I was like, that's amazing. Is that really what you want to do? Yeah, but you inspired me. Your passion when you teach business inspired me. And that's when I know, like, doesn't matter what subject you teach. When you're a teacher, you need to be passionate about it. Your why is why you teach that subject, why you teach Indonesian, and your students need to see your passion. So you can use so many strategies. You can use a lot of pedagogy, but when you're stuck, when I'm stuck, my enthusiasm, my passion actually motivate my students. They inspire my students to to be engaged in that subject. Like when I did Indonesian trip with my student, we just had our first trip to Indonesia, and some of the feedback that I received from my students, like, they said, we came to Indonesia, we decided to do this trip because we witnessed how passionate you are about the country, about your country, and we want to see it. So when you're a teacher, always ask yourself why you teach that subject, what makes you interested in the subject at the beginning, and try to impart that to your students. So my passion in everything that I teach, like in any subject, I always try to be passionate. And I know you can't always be enthusiastic, and there are moments that I'm just like so tired. But before I teach, I always try to prepare, okay, what is engaging about this topic. For example, this I taught from preschool until year 12. So I have taught, pre-literate students until year 12. So I know when I was teaching junior school, one of the unit was animals. And I was like, I don't want to just introduce so many Indonesian animals. So I pull out some interesting animals in Indonesia. Crested black macaque and tarsiers. Komodo dragon, of course, is very popular. But I wanted to introduce my students to unique animals in Indonesia. And the first time when I introduced crested black macaque, my students were like, year 3 students were like, ooh, what animal is that? And then when I introduced them tarsiers, my year 3 students also said, that animal is ugly. But I was just so enthusiastic introducing this cute animal. And then I said, look at their mohawk, aren't they cute? So the whole term, I just introduced crested black macaque and tarsiers, where they're from, using simple Indonesians, and then also introduced Komodo dragons. And after I introduced that unit, At the end, I got U3 students running around telling their family and their friends their favorite animal is tarsiers. And they want to go to Indonesia just to see a tarsiers or to see crested black macaque. So whatever topic you're teaching Indonesian or English or any other subject, try to find a springboard, try to find a perspective that you make you enthusiastic about it, and then bring it to your students, and it will catch. It might not catch all of your students, but it will catch some of them. Because you are one of the source of energy in the classroom. There will be some negative energy saying like, oh, that animal is like weird, or like this topic is boring. But if you still being enthusiastic about it, it will catch. Another example is Alba, the albino orang utan. It's the topic that I did at that time using Alba as my springboard is not about animal, but it's actually about identity. But I was thinking like, I don't want to just teach identity, like what's your name, where you're from, what's your country, where do you live? So I pull out Alba, not just an orang utan, it's an albino orang utan. And then I just like, what animal is this? And then from there, we discussed together, where was Alba born? Where did Alba live? And we created a story about Alba. We looked at it, we did a research about Alba, and my students remember that. And from there, I transfer, how about you? Where do you live? Where you're from? Your journey. And as an albino orangutan, Alba was rejected by other orangutan. So we talk about that as well, about relationship. So I try to make it interesting for myself first before I deliver it to my students. I try to make myself passionate about it first before I give it to my students. Until now, that was the Alba unit was last year, but until now, I still have some students talking to me about Alba. They said, I still remember the unit about Alba, and yeah, we'll learn about where Alba live, how old Alba's friends, but basically that unit is actually about identity. So when doesn't matter what the unit, the topic, try to find starting point where you are interested in it, you are enthusiastic about it, and bring your students to the goals through that. So that's why when I teach, my first starting point is any unit, any subject, any lessons, I got to be enthusiastic about it. And the next one in my practice is I need to know about my goals for myself and for my students. My goals for myself in my teaching is to ensure my students feel successful in their learning and to inspire passion in them too. And for my students, my goal is so they become confident and successful communicators. There are a lot of achievement standards, and as teachers, we could feel like very stressed out about, like, I need to hit all these achievement standards. I need to teach all of this content. And sometimes Indonesian is not a subject that get given a lot of time. Probably some schools actually only teach Indonesian once a week, probably, and not enough minutes, not enough hours for them to learn the language. So when I'm stressed out about achievement standards, about targets of where my students should be, I always remind myself, what is my core goal for my students? As a language learner, what is your main goal when you learn a language? That's what I keep asking myself. The main goal is to be able to communicate in that language. When you ask someone, when someone tells you, I learned Japanese, would you ask them about how many prefectures in Japan are there? Would you ask them about, tell me about kimonos? No, when someone said, I learned Japanese, the first thing is like, you want to start speaking in Japanese with them if you can. And like, so I know the core goal for any language learners is to be able to communicate in that target language. So that's what I want to deliver to my students as soon as possible, to make them feel successful because that's the basic barometer, basic measurement of language learning. If you can communicate in that target language, in the language you're learning, you will feel successful. So that's what I always tell my students as well. Like, you know, maybe you might not be able to speak fluently, but if we can communicate, if I can speak in Indonesian to you and you can understand what I say, and then you can respond that to me, that is a success. I said to my students, you're successful for your level. So that's what I always remind myself as well. And so that shape how I teach. My goals for my students and my goal for myself shape how I teach my content. The next thing is like, know your students and how they learn. So as I mentioned before, I use comprehensible input. I believe in teaching your students at their level and a little bit higher. So it is out of their comfort zone, but it is still comprehensible for them and they still can master it. If it's too difficult, they will give up. If it's too easy, they won't find the challenge. So to do this, like even knowing your students, like even though they're at the same year level, all year 8, they can be different. One unit that I teach, or I teach one lesson in the set with the same material, the same way teaching in one class, it was successful, but it could be a disaster in another class. So know your students and how they learn is not just knowing where their developmental level is, their age, but knowing even each class or even each students, how they learn. For example, because I teach using comprehensible input, mostly TPRS, I usually don't, we talk a lot in the class in Indonesians, but I usually don't give, when I give them the story in writing, they already understand what the story is about, because we discussed that a lot in target language, in speaking. However, this year I found a class that I couldn't use TPRS with them because of behavior. For example, they just couldn't sit quiet or listening. So we did a lot of visual support. So this is what I did to bring them from zero, like story. Like the topic was folklore or cerita rakyat. So usually in my previous classes, I don't need to give images to support their understanding. But with this class, they're different. I know they need the support, so I gave this for translations, and it worked really well. One of the students came to me saying, "Miss, I feel successful. I knew what the text is because you gave me the images." And it started with 3 little pigs. Yes, I didn't start with Indonesian folklore because I want to start from what they're familiar with. Giving them what's that they're not familiar with is the vocabulary. So give them the vocabulary first, and then after that, put that in the story, but then support that with images. So this actually, when I gave this, first time I gave them this without images, the story only, but I have taught them the vocabulary. But when they saw this, they felt it's too challenging already, even though they have access to the vocabulary. So I ended up bringing it down to this level, but it worked really well. And after that, I brought them back to without images, and they felt less stressed about it. They actually felt like, now I know, because we've learned about this story. I've looked at the images. Now I know what serigala is. And then after that, I gave them this. Just the images without the words, but I gave them some of the words, and they could write the story. And the last part, I will take all the words and just the images. That's like taking them step by step out of their comfort zone, but still not too hard, but still like stretching them. So knowing them and stretching their knowledge slowly. The next part will be I will introduce them Indonesian folklore, because now they're familiar with some of the words. So I will take them to Indonesian cerita rakyat. So that's my strategies in like teaching, but also knowing my students. So this I hadn't done this previously, but because of this class, I needed to bring them slowly. So it is very important to know your students, and whatever resources that you have, you might need to adjust it. Yeah, you might need to adjust it. Sorry, I just need to go back here. You might need to adjust it, depends on your students. I remember when I did my teaching degree, like when I started teaching, one of my lecturers said to me like, oh, the first few years is challenging because you need to build your resources, but after that you can just keep reusing the resources. And I was like, not really, because if you know your students and how they learn, you need to be a responsive teacher. You respond to how your students learn and adjust your materials or your resources and adjust the way you teach, so that your students can be successful in their learning. So you need to use various strategies that suit your students, and then, yeah, and high interest words as well. So what are the topics that are engaging for your students? Introduce the vocabulary for that. For example, my year 9 students, they are like interested in dating and talking about their crush. So we did a short unit about dating. We ask each other, yeah, about that. And it was a very engaging unit for them, because they like talking about themselves, about their crush, and they're just like sharing with their friends and with their teacher about it. And then another thing about like know your student and how they learn it. For example, I have a student who doesn't like writing, but I can't give a lot of tasks, like translation tasks, using online, because this student will straight away using Google Translator. So what I did was I just asked the student to read and then tell me now what's the translation, and I will write it for you. So that's another way as well to ensure that your students still feel successful and they're still showing their learning. Yeah, so this is very important. You need to be adaptable and to your students. And the next one is know the content and how to teach it. It's not only know the content, but know the subject. You teach a language. So how do you teach a language in the most effective way? For me, I use comprehensible input. I practice immersion. So I use intonations in my classroom a lot. Of course, it's supported with like vocabularies that the students already know, simplify it. But I want to provide language in context for my students, because I found it like when you learn a language in context, it's so much easier to build the comprehension, to build the understanding. Like when like the story of Three Little Pigs, because I taught the vocabulary within the context. When I actually gave my students, asked my students to write sentences, they actually found it harder to write random sentences. They want to write sentences like a story, because they're so used to storytelling and story writing. So I just said like, just write any 10 random sentences using the vocabulary that you know. But some of them actually ended up writing a story instead. So because context is really helpful for my students to help them understand. Therefore, sometimes it's when I give my students vocabulary tests, or translation test of a story, they actually found it easier to translate a story because it is a context, so they can understand the words that they don't know from the context. When I teach Indonesian, I focus on high frequency vocabulary, high frequency words, words that we use a lot in Indonesian. Why? Because I want my students to be able to communicate in Indonesian as soon as possible. Words like mau, suka, pergi, makan. I focus on those words so that I can, when I see them, even on the playground or on outside during the break, I could ask them, sudah makan? Sudah makan siang? When I teach them greetings, I don't give them all the greetings in Indonesian, like selamat malam, selamat tinggal. I focus on high frequency greetings and high frequency greetings that I will use in the school because I believe that's the most likely place where they speak Indonesian with me. Maybe outside the school, they don't use Indonesians a lot. Therefore, I not confined, but I focus on vocabulary that we could use at school as soon as possible. Because when they can speak in Indonesian with me, they feel successful straight away. I got a year 3 students coming to me almost like, every break, just want to speak with me in Indonesian. And sometimes he said to me, Miss, I'm so frustrated. I want to speak a lot with you in Indonesian, but my vocabulary is so limited. And I said, that's okay. Just speak with what you know. And if you don't know the word that you want to use, you can use English or you can ask me what the word is. But when you make, when the students feel successful, when they started to feel like they can communicate in Indonesian, it motivates them to pursue it further. For example, I got also parents coming to me. She has 3 children at the school, and all 3, as soon as because they learn like high frequency vocabulary together. So when they got home, they speak Indonesian to each other. And then the mom came to me saying like, what does these words mean? My children speaking, like talking like this, they call me this, they call me that. And so it is very important for, I think, to give high frequency vocabulary straight away so they can use it. And also high frequency structures or grammar. Also high interest vocabulary, because if, for example, like I taught a class, like before I said, my year 9 students, like they like to talk about dating. So that's okay. The unit wasn't about dating, but I have finished the unit and straight away we move on to have a mini unit about dating, talking in Indonesian. And they were very engaged. They said to me like, we really enjoy these lessons. And also like I had junior school students who were interested about Marvels. It's not in an Indonesian thing, but the vocabulary is Indonesian. So we discussed about Marvel movies, Thanos and all the Avengers in Indonesian. Use stories. I love using stories because it gives images to the students straight away. Like when I introduce stories, it's not just words for them, but there are images in their mind about the story. And then I use a lot of repetition. I use gestures as well. For example, atau is like this for me, this or this, atau tidak, I just use like this. So sometimes my students, they're so used to my gesture. When I ask them questions, they will reply like this, tidak, or Ibu May, boleh saya pinjam pensil atau pena? So they use the gestures as well. So, and I also like circling. Circling is when I introduce my students to a story or to a sentence, or when we talk. For example, I will ask all the 5W, what, how, where, why, when, who, to my students in Indonesians. Because for me, that will help them to speak and also to respond to my questions. For example, if I said like, if I ask my students, for example, what is your hobby? Apa hobi kamu? Hobi saya bermain sepak bola. Oh, kapan kamu bermain sepak bola? Di mana kamu bermain sepak bola? So I use that a lot to engage them in the conversation, to make them used to having that conversation as well with their friends. So that's my first step in teaching Indonesian. Always introduce, always circling, always introduce all the questions, asking questions, introduce all the question words. So now my students all familiar with question words, and they are also confident in asking questions. I remember like I was away in one lesson and my students said, "Di mana ibu?" They couldn't put the whole sentence like ibu kemarin di mana, but that's okay. They said ibu di mana, and I said, oh saya sakit. Oh, and then yeah, they ask questions to their friends as well. For example, so they're just used to the question words. At first, I usually put the question words on the wall, but after they're familiar with all of the question words, I usually take it off. But I still use that. And at the beginning of my lessons, usually I give them time to ask me questions or asking permissions. So for example, the first 10 minutes, they will come to me and ask questions or ask permissions in Indonesian. Create low stress opportunities to hear and use Indonesians. Again, by practicing immersion, speaking in Indonesians. So they're used to hearing Indonesians and asking them questions in Indonesian. They also used to responding in that target language. But also choral responses. When I ask questions to my students, especially about the topic that we're learning, for example, about Alba, about hobbies, or about a story, Three Little Pigs, I ask them to respond together. That's choral responses. So not just the students that put their hands up, but I always say, okay, respond together, answer together. And actually they help each other with that. For example, when I tell them a story, and then I will ask them, okay, what story did we learn yesterday? And then they will come up with the first, oh, we learned about this, for example, pada zaman dahulu, and then another student will say, oh, ada seekor. So we created all the story together as a whole class using choral responses. So it is very important, I think, to make the whole class respond together instead of just, pointing at a student or just choose the student who put their hands up, because choral responses create low stress environment in language learning. And also when I use immersion, I speak in Indonesian a lot. Actually, my students at first found it probably quite intimidating, but because they're used to it, the funny thing, even when I don't use Indonesian, sometimes I ask them questions in English. They responded back in Indonesian because they're just used to it, because that's the environment that they are familiar with. A student even told their parent, like saying, in my class, I speak we are like, we hear Indonesian and we speak Indonesians a lot. And then the parent said, oh, isn't that how a language class supposed to be? So yeah, so for me, my main focus is for my students to be able to communicate in Indonesian as soon as possible, even though it's barely minimum, probably limited at their level. And as long as they can comprehend me, they can understand me, and I can understand that, I think they will feel successful, and there is success there. As Christian said, we acquire language when we understand the messages, when we can communicate in that target language. And the last one, so that's my best formula, my formula for best practice, basically. My passion, I always remind myself, why do I teach Indonesian? And I always make sure that I'm passionate about the unit that I'm teaching, about the subject that I'm teaching, about the content that I'm going to deliver. And then my goals, like when it comes to the words, my goals is my student needs to be able to communicate with me in Indonesian, to be able to feel successful about it. They might not know like a lot of grammar rules, or they might not know, they might not be able to explain some structure, but if they can do it correctly, they can communicate with me correctly. I've found it like they're successful. For example, I got a student who studied Indonesian since year 8. I have explained to that student rainbow rule. I have explained noun phrase, but until like we did immersion a lot, these students started to hang on a second. That's a wrong word order. And then after that, this student corrected themselves a lot quicker. And after that, like, you know, used noun phrase correctly. But it takes time and a lot of like immersions, a lot of correct structure from me when I speak to the students. And know the students and how they learn means that you are a responsive teacher. You respond to your students, to the class where they're at. They could be, you could have about 4-year level, 4 classes of year 8, but each can be in different level of in their different learning journey, and you need to adapt. So one unit or one lesson plan could work for one class, but it could not work for another class. So you need to always adjust it to your students' level and your pedagogy, how you can teach your subject effectively, and yeah, make your student feel successful from day one would be great. So that's all from me.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nip, for your great perspective as practitioner of Indonesian language teacher. Now, we will open question and answer session. You can raise your hand and we will address you. You can mention whether your question belongs to Mr. Cook or Mr. Nip. Do you have any question or reflection regarding to this seminar?
Bapak Ibu silakan, bahasa Indonesia juga dipersilakan. Ada Nova itu, Alit ya. Nova.
Iya, silahkan Ibu Nova.
Cek, apakah suara saya terdengar?
Dengar Ibu.
Baik, terima kasih atas kesempatannya. Mohon izin untuk menggunakan bahasa Indonesia. Perkenalkan, nama saya Nova Diadara, bisa dipanggil Nova. Saya mahasiswa Magister Pendidikan Bahasa Indonesia dari Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. Saat ini saya sedang akan melakukan penelitian tentang pengembangan materi ajar BIPA, dan saya masih ada sedikit kebingungan untuk menentukan media ajarnya, apakah sebaiknya menggunakan e-book atau website, aplikasi seperti itu. Dari pemikiran saya sendiri, penggunaan e-book ini sudah terlalu umum, tetapi bisa saja memudahkan siswa BIPA untuk menggunakannya karena bisa saja hanya perlu scan barcode dan sebagainya. Tetapi jika menggunakan website atau aplikasi, ini tentu akan tidak biasa dan inovatif seperti itu. Tetapi bisa jadi ini akan menyulitkan siswa BIPA karena mereka sebelum belajar bahasa Indonesia harus belajar bagaimana mengoperasikan website atau aplikasi ini, sehingga khawatirnya itu akan memberikan beban tambahan untuk siswa BIPA. Jadi mungkin bisa Mr. Brandon dan Miss Turnip memberikan perspektif dari pribadinya seperti itu. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Nova. Can I just ask, when you say that you're using an ebook or a website, are you referring to the students using that to do activities or?
Yes, the students will doing some activities in learning about Indonesian culture, especially about Yogyakarta, Sumbu philosophy. It's has recognized in UNESCO, and it will some games there. And I think when using ebook, it will doing the game directly. But when I'm using the website, maybe it will doing the game learning in the website or application.
Okay. I think there are probably pros and cons to move to using both. It would probably depend on how much time that you have with the students. If you have more time with them, I think allowing them to navigate a website is a good skill for them to have. So that might be beneficial for your students if you have time. If you don't have time, the ebook sounds like a great tool for them as well. So yeah, I think whatever you're comfortable with, and I think it depends on the time you have with the students. And like Ibu May said before, I think it depends on your class and depends on the students you have. So if they struggle with navigating websites and things like that, you don't think that they're going to be able to do that, then maybe the ebook might be the best choice for that class.
Ya, saya pikir jawaban seperti yang kata Pak Brandon itu ya. Tapi kalau saya pikir kalau mau kalau website berarti mengandalkan internet begitu. Jadi perlu dipikirkan juga akses ke internetnya ya, dan device-nya juga. Dan kalau akses ke internet ada, kita juga perlu memikirkan tentang AI ya, tentang apa namanya authenticity of their learning there. Itu juga. Jadi kalau saya pikir kalau mau website berarti mesti dipikirkan kendala-kendala itu. Kalau ebook mungkin bisa di-download, jadi nggak perlu akses ke internet begitu. Tapi kalau website menariknya mungkin bisa lebih interaktif ya. Nah itu juga perlu dipertimbangkan. Dan juga tapi ya pro dan konnya itu, kalau pro-nya itu kan bisa lebih interaktif, tetapi juga perlu dilihat lagi kapasitas internetnya, dan juga perlu dilihat lagi interaktifnya itu seperti apa. Saya seperti di sekolahan saya sekarang kembali ke kertas lebih banyak sejujurnya dengan rampage AI, dan kadang-kadang murid juga laptop nggak di-charge, forgot to charge my laptop, or like yeah, or so many excuses. So sometimes I just like, let's just go down to pen and paper, guys. So yeah, so mungkin punya alternatif bagus. Saya pikir di zaman sekarang sebagai guru kita harus punya alternatif, ya, not just one way, but at least two. So then your students have no excuse. So yeah, dari saya.
Can I ask more to Mr. Brandon? So it can be conclude that if I don't have bonding with my student, it not recommend to use website, right?
When you say bonding with your students, do you mean that you don't have that positive relationship with your students?
Yeah, maybe just baru saja bertemu, kemudian ya using website, so it's not recommended, right?
No, I don't think it really matters. If you've just kalau baru bertemu, then I think using the ebook and or the website still is okay. Like I agree with Ibu May. I also kalau jujur ya, I at the moment I use a lot of pen and paper as well. I actually have designed, especially for SMP, I've designed my own workbooks, all in color, interactive activities and things we can do. If it requires me to use some kind of technology, I will usually play that on my smart TV in the room for the students. I know that may not be an option for everybody, but yeah, that's that way the students aren't tergoda to use the device for other things that they're not supposed to, and they're really focused on the learning. So
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brandon and Mr. Nip.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Nova. Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay. Next question from Bapak Iman Syah Abdullah.
Terima kasih. Selamat pagi, selamat siang dari Lombok. Perkenalkan, my name is Iman. I'm BIPA teacher as well. I've been teaching BIPA since 2013. I've got some questions actually for Mr. Brandon and Ibu May, if that's okay. Mr. Brandon, during your initial presentation, I got that teaching grammar or tata bahasa is also essential. I've been having this kind of difficulty in teaching BIPA to my students, especially to Australian students, because as far as I'm concerned, teaching Indonesian language to Western people, like white people, is so much different from teaching BIPA to the Asian students. What I can say is that most of Western students, Australian students, including in this group, they are more like a language function rather than language grammar. So what I'm asking from both of you is that how am I going to teach grammar without teaching grammar directly? That's my first question. And the second one is it is more like a comment for Ibu May. Saya sangat setuju sekali dengan pendapatnya Ibu May bahwa to be able to encourage students need to be encouraged as well. Jadi harus menjadi guru yang sangat passionate dulu ya Bu May ya. Dan yang paling penting juga tadi saya melihat harus ada memahami banget siswa kita. Jadi dengan memahami siswa kita, kita juga bisa menentukan topik yang sangat membantu dalam proses pemerolehan bahasa. Jadi sometimes saya juga melakukan hal itu Ibu May. Kadang di buku mengajarkan ini, tapi tidak ada satu hal pun tentang apa yang membuat siswa saya suka di dalam buku. Jadi saya juga improvisasi seperti yang Ibu lakukan, seperti anak ini sukanya membahas apa ya, dan itu juga yang saya sangat lakukan. Terima kasih Ibu May sudah kembali mengingatkan kami tentang bagaimana mengajar bahasa Indonesia. Thank you very much. That's all from me.
Baik, silahkan Mr.
Okay,
Brandon.
thank you, Pat. Yes, this is why we have a lot of discussion around grammar, I find, amongst Indonesian teachers. I don't think we should be focusing on grammar all the time. It shouldn't be the main focus of our lessons. However, I have noticed that in my career that there is a difference in understanding of grammar and how we explain it, depending on what is our native language. As a second language of Bahasa, I had to learn all of the grammar and strategies as a second language learner. So I've probably learned all of that grammar differently to, say, someone who's lived in Indonesia and picked it up and maybe learnt English grammar. So the way that I explain grammar to my students may be different to how people from Indonesia explain Indonesian grammar themselves. And I have found that. So when I explain the grammar to the students and go through things, it has really helped them in kind of overcoming that confusion about how certain things work. It's not a focus of mine. I don't focus on it every lesson. I find that there is a bit of more of a stronger focus in year 10 before they go up to year 11 and 12. But prior to that, it is mainly just focusing on building their passion for it, their love for it, improving their vocabulary and so on. Does that kind of answer your question?
Ya.
Mungkin saya menambahkan ya Pak Imansyah ya. Terima kasih untuk terus berusaha menghidupkan semangat student lewat finding something that engaging for them and improvisasi ya. Memang seperti itu kadang-kadang kalau kita melihat unit yang sepertinya ini kok kita aja nggak tertarik dengan unit ini gitu. Jadi menemukan sudut dari unit itu yang bisa membuat kita semangat mengajarnya akan mempengaruhi student kita juga. Untuk grammar saya sendiri kalau saya prakteknya saya menyebutnya 5 minutes grammar. Saya tidak mengajarkan grammar secara langsung misalnya satu lesson 30 menit kita fokus dengan verbs saya enggak seperti itu karena saya lebih banyak context based or story based or text based. So jadi saya biasanya akan memilih teks yang sesuai dengan kemampuan student saya atau teks yang kemana saya akan membawa student saya. Seperti teks tentang Alba yang saya ceritakan adalah tentang identitas. Jadi saya akan ini orang utan namanya Alba seperti itu. Lalu di situ kalau murid saya bisa mengerti, bisa apa yang saya katakan, dan mereka nggak mempertanyakan, mengapa kosakatanya seperti ini, atau mengapa verbnya berbeda, saya biasanya biarkan saja. Tapi kadang-kadang ada student yang bertanya, oh mengapa ada adalah, and then I will explain grammar, and I try to make it 5 minutes only, no more than 5 minutes. And seperti misalnya penjual, and then, we learn that, and sebelumnya murid taunya membeli, menjual. Mengapa ada penjual? Oh, that's the doer. Penjual means someone who sell. Menjual means to sell. And that's it. And then we move on, keep reading the text. Seperti itu. And then begitu mereka encounter pembeli, hang on, there is pembeli. Yeah, remember, pembeli means the doer, someone who buys. And what is the word to buy? Membeli. There you go. And then after that, they will connect dots. Does that mean if it's with verb means the doer? Yes, you got it. So, tapi saya nggak melakukan drill banyak. Jadi begitu saya memang mau introduce vocabulary itu atau begitu students menemukan kata itu di teks, saya akan menjelaskan grammarnya. Saya pernah melakukan grammar drill adalah iseng-iseng dan hasilnya setelah itu mereka menulis adalah selalu. Setiap is, setiap are, they put adalah, and I was like, this is a disaster. But that's my practice. Jadi ya saya biasanya grammar 5 menit grammar. Begitu mereka encounter kata itu, saya akan jelaskan tata bahasanya. Setelah itu, apalagi kalau murid bertanya, setelah itu saya akan beri beberapa contoh, lalu we move on. Tapi karena pengajaran saya adalah text based or context based, begitu Pak. Saya harap itu bisa membantu sedikit.
Terima kasih Bu Mei, itu sangat membantu sekali karena jujur hal ini jarang sekali saya kerjakan karena memang lebih banyak pada drilling seperti tadi, unit untuk tata bahasa sendiri terpisah dari bacaannya dia. Kayaknya itu lebih bagus. Ya, terima kasih Bu Mei.
Baik, terima kasih Bapak Imansyah. Selanjutnya Ibu Siti Farah, silahkan.
Baik, semuanya terima kasih untuk kesempatannya. Apakah suara saya terdengar?
Jelas, Ibu.
Oke, baik, terima kasih. Baik, sebelumnya I will ask a questions for Mr. Brandon and Ibu Mei for the speaker, but I will ask with Indonesian language. Jadi saat ini saya adalah mahasiswa S2 di Universitas Indonesia, Ilmu Linguistik, dan saya berencana untuk melanjutkan tesis saya mengenai BIPA. Jadi untuk ketika S1 terlebih dulu, saya mengembangkan BIPA dasar. Nah, pertanyaan saya adalah, jika saya melanjutkan penelitian saya tersebut mengenai aplikasi seperti itu, apakah masih applicable untuk pembelajar sekarang atau saat ini? Karena aplikasinya itu seperti terdiri dari kompetensi membaca dan juga menyimak. Jadi mengisi soal di aplikasi tersebut dan juga ada proses menyimaknya dari situ. Dan di situ juga isinya adalah saya referensi dari bahan bacaan itu sendiri dari buku dari Badan Bahasa seperti itu. Terima kasih Ibu Mei dan Mr. Brandon.
Baik, silahkan Mr. Cook and Ibu Mei.
Thank you, Siti. I was a little bit, some of you cut out a little bit there, so some of the information I didn't quite catch. So, Ibu Mei, did you want to make a comment?
Boleh saya ulangi, Ibu siapa? Ibu Siti ya, maaf ya.
Okay, baik.
Yeah.
So I want to continue my thesis with my previous research when I S1 terlebih dahulu like that. And the topic is about people learning. I make media ajar for text procedure, and that applications. I put like for menyimak dan membaca. That's only two computations and that applications. And my question is that the application is still applicable for students right now? Because I mapped that at skripsi 2022 or 2021, I think, because it's like in COVID era. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's applicable. Dari yang Ibu Siti katakan tadi adalah menyimak itu mendengarkan ya, listening dan reading. Yes, of course, because karena kita selalu ya tahu four language proficiencies are listening, reading, speaking, and writing. So, ya, jadi dua itu tetap applicable. Bahkan saya justru itu yang saya fokuskan ke murid-murid saya selalu. Karena test language proficiency always all those four. So, yeah. So that's how. So it is very important. So reading and listening, although they're both input ya, so understanding ya. Although kalau membaca ada reading comprehension-nya juga toh.
Iya betul, betul Ibu.
Ya bisa sih. Kalau Pak Brandon mungkin mau menambahkan.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're still very relevant. So I think the COVID era helped us a lot to kind of create a lot of these awesome resources during that time. So it's given us a lot of ideas for things we can continue doing. So yeah, I agree. It's still very relevant.
Okay,
maaf.
thank you.
Iya, maaf ini bisa Ibu Siti sudah ya, maaf ya.
Oh ya, terima kasih Bu Mei dan Mr. Brandon.
Iya, saya maaf ini Bu Yuli, saya ini ada pertanyaan dari Ibu Nurul Lutfi Aulia ya yang ditulis. Boleh saya ini jawab?
Ya, silahkan.
Karena Ibu Nurul itu bertanya tentang is that communication is one of the goals for learning Indonesian. Are there other goals as well? Is Indonesian included in formal exams? How does it work in your states? Because I've heard that in Victoria, Indonesian is part of PCE and exam results can be used for university entry. If so, does this make the learning goals more complex since students also have to focus on exam preparation? So waktu saya berkata tentang learning goal, itu saya memberi yang communicate in Indonesian itu that's my own goals for my students. But of course, waktu kita mengajar bahasa Indonesia, there are achievement standards that we need to target. So that's jadi waktu saya mengajar ya achievement standards itu learning outcomes mereka itu yang saya targetkan sesuai dengan year level atau kelas mereka. Dan kalau di ACT karena saya mengajar di Canberra kita ada BSSS untuk college dan itu bahasa Indonesia dihitung dalam AITER mereka ya bisa dimasukkan AITER. Tetapi tidak harus exam. Teachers punya kebebasan untuk menentukan material uji students gitu. Jadi kita mau menguji student speakingnya, writing, asalkan kita memberi 3 tes, 3 assessments dalam 1 semester minimum. 3, maksimum 5 assessments, dan itu terserah seperti apa. Salah satunya adalah exam. Kalau kita mau memberi exam kepada murid kita bisa, tapi saya tidak memberi exam kepada murid saya. Saya biasanya menguji mereka speaking, writing, dan comprehension. Tetapi ya, jadi ada kebebasan seperti itu. Mungkin itu menjawab pertanyaan Ibu Nurul.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Mei. Baik, selanjutnya kita boleh lanjut ke pertanyaan selanjutnya ya, Ibu Mei dan Mr. Cook, dari Selma. Silahkan Selma.
Oke, baik. Assalamualaikum. Selamat pagi semuanya. Oh, selamat siang ya. Sudah siang di sini. Nama saya Selma. Perkenalkan, saya dari APP BIPA NTB. Ya, dan saya juga sudah mengajar BIPA kurang lebih 5 tahun ya. Oke. Iya, saya ada pertanyaan nih. Oke, pakai bahasa Indonesia. Semoga bisa ini ya. Semoga bisa catch Mr. Brandon juga. Oke, apakah Mr. Brandon ataupun Miss May punya pengalaman mengajarkan bahasa Indonesia kepada penutur non bahasa Indonesia dan bahasa Inggris gitu? Kalau seandainya pernah gitu, is there any best practice for that gitu? Karena beberapa kali nih saya punya pengalaman mengajarkan bahasa Indonesia dan itu agak struggling gitu mengajarkan bahasa Indonesia kepada mahasiswa Korea gitu. Dan mereka juga kita tahu mereka struggling juga di bahasa Inggris gitu. How to bridge that gitu. Nah, terus pertanyaan kedua, are you referring to like CEFR CEFR untuk menentukan materi bahasa Indonesia? Materi bahasa Indonesia untuk penutur asing di Australia. Kalau iya seperti apa dia gitu? Are you referring to CEFR atau ada CEFR like yang versi bahasa Indonesia seperti itu? Terima kasih. Ya, sudah. Yeah,
So can I
that's
just
my question.
clarify what you mean by CEFR? Is that
When we teach English, so we are referring to CEFR, right? So it's a common European framework of reference. Okay, but do you have it's like CEFR like in Indonesian version? I mean, when you decide the material for Bahasa Indonesia to the foreign language, foreign learners, that's my question.
okay? So
Okay.
working in a school, if we have when you say foreign learners, do you mean students who cannot speak English at all, or do you mean students that can speak English but it's limited?
Yeah, that's my question.
Okay. So,
Okay.
I mean, in my school, we have students that start at the school sometimes that their English is not great, but that's usually when they're in SD. So we don't have a lot of students that actually start in SMP or SMR that can't actually speak English very well because we don't have the facilities to be able to support those students. If you have a student that struggles to speak English, obviously it's hard to, you would have to best teach them Bahasa Indonesia, you would have to be able to communicate those strategies in their first language, I would assume, or in the second language that they can speak fluently. So yeah, that would be difficult.
Okay, thank you. All right. How about Ibu May? Do you have any experience, Bu May? Maybe that I can gain from you.
Wah, gimana ya? Mengajar, tapi ngajarnya apa sih itu language untuk delivery-nya itu bahasa Inggris. So you teach Indonesian, but in a class with English as instruction language. Is that correct?
They have really very limited ability in English juga gitu. Jadi sebenarnya their first language-nya itu bukan bahasa Inggris gitu. Kayak misalnya nih, mahasiswa dari Korea, mahasiswa dari Palestina, seperti itu. Kan
Jadi
pernah
ini
nggak Bu May mengajar?
kelas online atau kelas face to face?
Dua-duanya, Bu.
Dua-duanya.
Bagaimana? Pernah nggak punya pengalaman itu?
Kalau begitu, pertama saya sih, sebentar saya mikir dulu pengalaman. Saya punyanya pengalaman dosen bahasa Jepang saya yang nggak bisa bahasa Indonesia sama sekali.
Dan bahasa Inggris beliau bisa nggak?
Nggak bisa. Jadi dia mengajar
Nah.
pure dalam bahasa Jepang kepada murid-murid.
Oh, begitu.
Dia
Oh, oke,
mengajar di
oke,
Gajah
oke.
Mada. Saya jurusannya sastra Jepang waktu itu. Nah, mungkin bisa seperti itu. Tapi harus, kalau saya pikir, really comprehensible input. So your students need to comprehend your input, using gestures, using images. For example, if you want to introduce animal, misalnya anjing, you need to put the image of anjing instead of a dog. So that's a universal language for your students, I guess. So use images a lot. Use images a lot to explain the vocabulary if you can. And then use English after that next to it. So there's always three then: the target language, the image, and the English as the universal language probably. So, and then you can teach in comprehensible input that way, but you need, I think I just reflected upon my Japanese teacher. You need to do it really slow. You need to do it gesture, and your student respond in Indonesian as well. And then then you can know whether they respond correctly or incorrectly, because my Japanese teacher could only do like that to us, when we responded correctly, when responded incorrectly, like that. And then any writings, he will just like check, just like that. So so that's something that
Baiklah ya. Oke,
maybe
terima kasih Ibu. Iya.
jadi slowly saja mungkin.
Iya, oke. Berarti sama ya Bu ya. Belum terpecahkan nih misteri ini. Oke. Baiklah. Terima kasih Ibu.
Sama-sama.
Baik, terima kasih Ibu Selma. Selanjutnya pertanyaan dari Ibu Ninis Aini Fitria Dewi. Ini sudah ada di chat box. Tapi juga Raisen, apakah mau langsung atau di chat box saja? Bagaimana Ibu Ninis? Baik, saya sebutkan yang di chat box ya. Bu Ninis ingin bertanya, kalau dalam satu kelas itu isi muridnya berbeda level, bagaimana cara guru menyampaikan materi? Mengikuti level yang paling rendah atau memilih level tengah-tengah atau bagaimana? Silahkan Ibu Mei dan Mr.
I might jump in there for this one. I think this is probably more something I can answer it quite well, because at our school we have 1 hour a week to teach Bahasa in primary school. And we also only get 1 hour a week to teach in year 7 and year 8. The students aren't streamed. Jadi bisa agak susah ya to kind of differentiate for all of these different levels of students. You can't, for best practice, you really can't create one level task for everybody. You really need to be catering for students who are really struggling, and also for students who are, your high flyers, your extended students. However, I know that can be difficult because when you've got those differentiation variables, but also students who have started the language at different year levels, you can sometimes have up to 8 different levels in your classroom. So it can be very difficult. But one thing you can do is for tasks to try and create, if you can, at least 3 levels. So you've got, you're very, very basic to a kind of a medium level with a bit of challenge to something that's a little bit extended. If you can manage to do that, the students can choose which level they feel comfortable with. It's always good to encourage the kids to try something a bit more challenging, but having those 3 levels there just creates a little bit of that differentiation for all those different levels in your class.
Yeah, I agree. At this moment, my year 11 and 12 students I have beginning Indonesian, continuing Indonesian year 11, and continuing Indonesian year 12. So I usually split my lessons into two. While I teach my continuing students, I give some independent work for my beginning students, and after that, swap like that. So it is very what if it's in the classroom, like my year 8 with various levels? I usually have my barometer students, which is like a students who's like, in general, like probably like certain percentage, like majority of my students is at that level. So I usually teach at that majority level and then give extension or more challenging tasks for my high achievers or like more advanced students, and give a supported task for my students that need support. So that's how I practice it so far, actually. So that's it.
Baik, terima kasih Ibu Mei dan Mr. Cook. Apakah ada pertanyaan dari Profesor Yuli?
Ya, masih ada satu lagi mungkin yang terakhir ya. Ada Mbak Nirwasita terakhir pertanyaan, the last question.
Baik Ibu, silahkan Ibu Nirwasita. Baik.
Oke. Sebelumnya terima kasih banyak. Perkenalkan, nama saya Nirwa. Saya mahasiswa Universitas Negeri Jakarta Pendidikan Bahasa Jerman. Dan saat ini saya sedang working on my final project for my studies, which is about creating a pocket book for BIPA learners. So I want to ask to Ibu Mei and Mr. Cook. So when teaching Indonesian as second language, is it better for learning materials to be presented fully in Indonesian, or should there be a mix of the student first language? So there is two language, for example, Bahasa Indonesia and English for the explanation. Is it better fully Indonesian or mix into language? Thank you.
As a second language learner of Indonesian myself, I would say that it depends probably on what you're teaching them at the time. But I think a mix is sometimes okay. I think there's a little bit of uncertainty out there about how much English we would use and how much Bahasa we would use. And maybe we should just use, have everything in the target language. But I can say from a personal experience, I also at university took 2 years of Mandarin and I also took 2 years of Japanese. And when we had was a relief lecturer come into our Mandarin lectures, and for the first year, I really enjoyed learning Mandarin, and there was a mix of English used to explain concepts, but also some Mandarin, and I felt like it was scaffolded. When the relief lecturer came in the second year, she produced all the materials and everything in Mandarin. I felt overwhelmed, and I was a university student, and I remember getting very frustrated, and I lost that enjoyment of it because I felt that I no longer understood what was going on. So I experienced that firsthand, and I have another. I remember I took a Spanish course not that long ago. And I remember sitting in the Spanish course, and the Spanish teacher was using just Spanish the entire time. As a beginner, that can be very overwhelming. I think a mix is sometimes okay, because remember, we want to keep our students on side, and we want them to feel that they, if they don't understand what we're talking about the whole time, they're going to switch off. They're just not going to engage. So I think using a mix is okay. Obviously, if you're explaining more grammar concepts or something that requires a little bit more explanation and you really need to understand, I would do that in English. But if it's something like you're teaching the vocabulary, or it's something that you can do in the target language the entire time, then go for it. So you really need to kind of be strategic in when you would use that. Hopefully that answered your question. I'll pass over to Ibu Mei.
Yeah, I think that's why there is target language and there is instruction language. So a mix is important as well. And if you want to use target language, like what I use, immersions, it has to be comprehensible. Your students should be able to comprehend it. If they don't comprehend, they don't understand what you're talking about, you lost them. So you need to maintain it. I encourage using, of course, target language in the class, but I always, as I said, limit it, make sure they understand what you're using. And even when they understand it, when you use target language in the class, it takes a lot of brain power. It really, really takes a lot of brain power. I just did that. I introduced a text to my beginner students using vocabulary that she knew. And I did a lot of circling, questioning about that text. Who, when, where, simple questions in Indonesian. After 40 minutes, she just like, my brain is burning. She said like, she just put her head down and it's like, my brain is burning. And I was like, yes. I said, let's pause it, and then gave the students brain break. Yes, I did comprehensible input. I went to the workshop when it's all in Chinese, it's all in like Hawaiian, just for the practice. And yeah, 30 minutes usually maximum they can handle it. And after that, that's comprehensible. That's your student can understand the language that you're using. 30 minutes, 40 minutes top. That's why usually if you use immersion system where you use comprehensible input, they suggested every 10 minutes, you gotta give them brain break. You gotta give a break from that. So you can't just keep giving them all target language without a break, because it's something happened in your brain building that connection. It's hard. Like, so yeah, so I encourage, of course, using target language, but again, it has to be comprehensible, and you have to see where your students at. As soon as you see like they're like, even though they understand, but you can see they're already like feeling overwhelmed, stop. Give them a lot of brain break and like back again on, and explain it in English, in your instruction language if they don't understand. Don't try to explain it in target language and make it harder for them to understand. So I hope that helped.
And
Thank you for.
I'll
Oh,
just
yeah?
add on as well from Ibu May. Sorry, Ibu. I also, I'll give you an example. This year, I really wanted to increase the amount of Bahasa using in my Year 8 class. And I set out with a goal that I wanted to use as much Bahasa as possible. And I remember it took a lot of brain power from the students, but also a lot from the teacher, because you have to constantly reflect on where are they at, what don't they understand, but you have to provide the tools. And if you use the same language every lesson, then they start to get a bit of a rhythm and they feel a bit more confident. If you change too much, you lose them. So it has to be very structured. For example, every lesson, my students line up at the door, and as they come in, we just start. I say "Apa kabar," and I greet them one-on-one as they come in. They sit down, they get their workbooks open, and we hari ini kita akan belajar tentang, and we go through the learning intent, success criteria, and that's a routine that they have every lesson. But if I deviate from that, if I chuck some new words in there that they're not used to, all of a sudden it's like they freak out. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cook and Ibu May.
Baik, terima kasih juga. Lalu selanjutnya, bagaimana Ibu Yuli? Apakah ada pertanyaan dari Ibu Yuli?
Ya, mungkin terakhir sebagai penutup Pak Brandon dan Bu May, jadi banyak pertanyaan yang saya ya mungkin Bu May dan Pak Brandon bisa menyampaikan. Jadi terkait dengan misalnya para mahasiswa ataupun Bapak Ibu guru begitu ya ingin menjadi guru bahasa Indonesia di Australia tuh seperti apa? Karena kan Pak Brandon di Perth, kemudian Bu May juga di Canberra. Mungkin itu pertanyaan penutup saya. Terima kasih.
Saya dulu nih Pak Brandon. Menjadi guru bahasa Indonesia, murid dari Indonesia, students dari Indonesia mau menjadi guru bahasa Indonesia di Australia, seperti saya misalnya. Saya kurang tahu pathway, yang saya jalankan adalah saya kuliah di Australia. Saya mengambil postgraduate di Australia, teaching. Jadi gelar saya di Indonesia itu adalah sastra Jepang, lalu MM, Magister Management, tapi saya langsung mengambil graduate diploma of teaching and learning. Setelah itu, jadi saya itu classroom teacher. My first class is actually foundation, kindergarten, and then there was an opportunity to teach Indonesian, so I took that opportunity. So that's one of the pathway that I knew. And then you can, even though you don't have, for example, you come here as a international student, and you can, after 2 years studying your masters, you might be able to get because that's what we previously experienced when I was in Darwin, got state sponsorship to be a teacher. If they need teachers, that they really need the teachers. If the demand is high, some states would like to sponsor foreigners. So you get that sponsorship visa, working visa. But you need to get that sponsorship for like 3 years, I think. So then 5 years, and then you can apply for your PR. And from there you can, once you get your PR, you can work in any other schools, or you can move states. But that's the pathway that I knew, because I found that inshore sponsorship is easier than offshore sponsorship. But if you want to do it offshore, like I don't want to study in Australia, like, you probably think about the finances and everything like that. There is, I think, immigrations, you have to look at what skills are immigration looking for, usually skilled migrant, but usually I think they require like experience. You have to have the experience in the field as well. First, like teaching, for example, if you want to teach in maths in Australia, then you have to be an experienced maths teacher in Indonesia. And if there is a demand in the immigrations, then you can apply for skill visa if there is a demand. So you need to check that demand as well there for that skill. And also then you have to still meet ISO standards as well to get that to be able to teach in Australia. So I think those are the only two pathways that I knew.
For me, I'm not too knowledgeable about all of the visa pathways, obviously, because I've lived here my whole life. So when I did my degree, it was a Bachelor of Asian Studies, and I majored in Indonesian. And then I chose to do a diploma of education, postgraduate after that in secondary education. There are two ways to become a teacher. You can either take on an education degree and then learn to be a teacher through that degree. And I think you can choose whether or not you choose secondary education or primary education. I think that degree is usually about 3 to 4 years, and you can go straight into teaching. Or you can have an undergraduate degree in a particular field, and that's what I took. I chose Asian Studies and Culture, so it was less about, there's nothing about education, but it was all about Indonesia was my focus, and other Asian countries, and business and economics and things like that. And then I chose to do my diploma for 1 year. My advice would be, though, now I think that both of those options are available. I chose to do an undergraduate degree first that didn't relate to education, because I found that I had a lot more knowledge that I took into my education diploma. Whereas if you take an education degree, I think your ability to take elective units on other areas is limited. So if you can take an undergraduate first, if you have that option, I would recommend you take that option, and then do a diploma of education afterwards. If you can manage to get a master's as well, that's even better, because I think the longer, I'm not sure how it is in other states, but in Western Australia, the longer you spend at university in terms of getting that education degree, I think 4 years, you actually get paid more when you first start teaching. So that's a bit of a bonus as well.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Brandon, Bu Mei ya. Jadi everyone yang selalu bertanya ya, dan mudah-mudahan jadi inisiasi ya untuk mencari informasi lebih lanjut. Silahkan Lydia, saya kembalikan untuk sebagai penutup.
Alright. Thank you very much for the speaker, Mr. Cook, Mr. Nip, all participants as well. So for participants, don't forget to complete the attendance list. So as the summary of this seminar, I conclude that these seminars share a comprehensive guide for Indonesian language teachers. So having objective in responsive teaching is a must to shape your way of teaching. Moreover, acknowledge that teacher has their own strengths, enthusiasm, and passionate to inspire students in engaging the subject itself. So do your best version with fun and hard work. That's all for today. For your information, this agenda is continuing series, so please stay connected with us. Once again, thank you very much for your time and contributions. See you in our next event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Pak Brandon, Bu Mei, Bu Hara juga yang di chat, Bapak Ibu semua ya. Sampai bertemu lagi di seminar selanjutnya. Saya izin akhiri Zoom-nya. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih
Terima
banyak.
kasih.
Terima kasih Bu Hara.
Terima kasih, Bu, Bapak.